And happy Father's Day, fathers. Happy Father's Day. It was interesting when I was putting together this message. I'm thinking, how am I going? I'm not all that traditional, as you know. So I'm trying to figure out how am I going to present a message for fathers today. So what I decided to do was I would just approach it from a different vantage point. But before I do that, let me just, I read some things that this pastor wrote, and there were statements that he made, and I was just curious whether you guys agree with him. So let me just read them to you. When I say, I can't find it, I mean it didn't supernaturally fall into my hands, so I have no clue where it is. So is that what you guys mean? Or how about this? When I say, I heard what you said, I mean that I didn't hear what you said, but I am hoping that I can fake it so that you won't be mad at me.
Never.
Yeah. I always know because I'll do something and I'll say, you really didn't listen to me. Anyway, third was, when I say to you at the mall, that looks great on you, I mean, please don't try anything else. I'm starving to death. Okay, then we have, when I say the house looks great, I mean, please don't turn on the vacuum cleaner while I'm watching a football game. When I say I think I know how to get there, it means I don't have a clue where I'm going. But don't ask me to stop and ask somebody.
This is about men.
It's about men.
No.
So do you guys feel curious? Is that how you? Is that true?
GPS makes it all easy now.
It's not true. So you're telling me, Bill, that if any of these things, if you said these things, you actually mean it?
To stop it, I had no problem when I was married stopping even if we're going 5 minutes away to find out. Thanks. Well, she could figure it out. No.
That's because you're part of the FBI. You're an interrogator. I've read so many stories that I'm going to sort of incorporate into this because some of them were funny. There is a story. It says, some men in a pickup truck drove into a lumber yard. One of the men walked in the office and said, we need some 4x2s. The clerk said, you mean 2x4s, don't you? The man said, oh, well, I'll go check, and went back to the truck. He returned in a minute and said, yeah, I meant 2x4s. All right, well, how long do you need them? The customer paused for a minute and said, I better go check. After a while, the customer returned to the office and said, a long time. We're going to build a house. He wondered how long the meat was, yeah, actually, it's a cute joke. Anyway, this morning what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you my perspective of what I think a dad is. So I'm going to build a dad, like build a bear. I'm going to build a dad. First of all, we all know that we build the people in our lives. We are builders. And what I did was I went to see what building meant. I looked it up in the dictionary.com. It means to construct, especially something complex, by assembling and joining parts or materials. It means to establish, increase, or strengthen. It means to mold, to form, or create. If we are called to build the people or build into the people that God surrounds us with, that's a pretty heavy-duty job to do, don't you think? Unfortunately, most of us don't do it very well. So when God now begins to bring more people into your life, you have to keep this in mind because God, it's not by accident that they're there. You need to build something into them. And in turn, they will build something into you. I had a teacher. He was my gym teacher when I was in elementary school. And as I've shared, I had those challenges growing up. But I don't know if this man knew that I grew up in this difficult, I don't know what he knew about me. But this guy, I told you I was very athletic, so he took a liking to me. And there was another girl in my class, and there was 2 of us. We were very athletic. And we always competed. You know, she was very good at certain things and I was very good at other things. So we would have this competition. We would compete against other schools, and her and I would always go head to head. But I'm so grateful for him because he built into me. What he did was when things were so very difficult in my life growing up, he found something that I could excel at. And by doing that, it gave me a distraction. And even though I was challenged, as I shared with you last week, there were those times I would question myself. This man took the time to build me up. And I am grateful for that because to this day, that's how I think. You know, when our kids were, I don't know, Keith, when did you guys start going to the gym with us? How old were you? 16. Paul was joining a gym, and I had suggested that I could see Keith was kind of like, you know, where am I going? And I said to Paul, you got to take Keith with you so he can join the gym with you. And my daughter will tell you that her favorite memories are of us all being at the gym at the same time. And, you know, although I'd work out with her, they do their own thing, and, well, you know, Keith is Mr. Social. So, what was it, like 3 o'clock one morning, he wasn't home, and you called the gym, and there he was talking to people? But that's Keith. But anyway, it was very odd. I'd be lying down on these, on the benches, and I'm pumping iron. And their friends would stand over me and go, hey, Mrs. Kaplan. Hi. It was really awkward. But it was a good time. It was, you know, we took the time to build into our lives, and Paul really took our sons and our daughter and sort of took them under his wing and walked with them, and I'm really grateful for that. So, my question to you this morning is, did you take the time to build into the people that God put into your life? Now, Bill, your kids are still young. You get to do that. You know, most of us have older children. But it doesn't mean we still don't influence them. And it doesn't mean that we don't make an impact in their lives. We are still to build. Even, you know, God is a very interesting God. He has a way of taking down what is not good. He will demolish those things that we have built or that we constructed that are not really good. And he, at that point, will help us to rebuild and to build good things into the lives that God has given us. So we do know, of course, that God is the greatest builder. You'll have to excuse me. I know I keep coughing. I can't get rid of this thing. Hebrews 3:4 says this, every house is built by someone, but God is the builder of everything. God is the builder of everything that is good and holy and right. That includes you guys. He built you with the purpose in mind, and he built you knowing that he would bring people into your lives, children perhaps, or maybe not even children, maybe other people into your life that you would have an opportunity to build because God built into you. And he's not done. You know, as long as we have breath, God is going to continue to bring people into our lives so that we can build into them. And I really want you to think about that. I want you to think about what you do, because it makes a difference. It makes such a difference in every person's life. And I know I've shared with you guys before that I learned the love of God through my husband. Paul has always been consistent. He has never, no matter where I was, he never deviated. He's always loved us. Always, always, always loved me. I didn't know love like that. And he's done the same thing with our kids. So Megan's actually in a good place because my sons are that way. They will love their wives as Paul loved me. They will. I can guarantee it. For all the stuff that I didn't really care about with my father-in-law, especially at the end, the one thing he did teach you was how to love your wife. Wouldn't you agree with that? I mean, when I met Paul, it was so odd. This was very odd to me. Now, you have to understand, my father was calling my mother names, you know, and he would pretend, and I think my mother pretended she was deaf, so she couldn't hear what the thing. Don't you think? Anyway, but I went into Paul's family's house, and his father was goosing her butt, and I'm like, to me, that was the oddest thing I ever saw. I remember one day we came home from college, and we walk in, and his mother had a cute little figure, and we walk in the house, and she's out in her underwear walking around the house, and I'm thinking, holy crow. I'd never seen anything like that. But they were really open, they really loved each other, and I mean, I think that's really healthy. I had never seen anything like that in my whole life. As a matter of fact, when I went through my process of healing, one of the things, and although Paul's mother was only around for I think about 4 or 5 years, because his mother died very young, she was 47. She had developed cancer, and within 9 months she was dead. But when I was going through this process of healing, I would look at his mother and I'd say, well, maybe that's the way I'm supposed to be. For example, Paul bought me a fur coat one year. And I told him I wanted a furry coat. He came home with a fur coat. And it's very nice. I still have it. It's a fox. And I didn't know how to wear it. I don't know how I don't know how to explain that to you. It was like awkward. It was like I was putting on something, although I loved it. It was like, wow, how do I wear that? So I would imagine his mother in it, and then I could wear it. Because my mother would say she hated being a woman and all that other stuff, and I loved it. So anyway, I learned all that from him. And so you guys have if you're married, you have a very, very, very important job to do, not only for your children, but for your spouse. Because you truly are the evidence of Christ's love to us. It's a heavy responsibility, but it's very doable. And we have evidence of that right there. I'm going to refer to Paul a lot, so. So let me build my father for you. If I could, I would build a father who is humble, gentle, and patient. Ephesians 4:2 says, "Be completely humble and gentle, be patient, bearing with one another in love." I read a really interesting article that was written by that was published by the New York University of Child Study. It's a center up in New York, and it's about parenting styles and temperaments. It was very interesting because what they did was they took 4 different parenting styles and they discussed in this particular article, combining with their temperaments, how that affects your children. And in this particular article, they were focusing on the weight of a kid. Let me give you the 4. I can't even say it. Authoritarian or extremely strict parents that are highly controlling. Let me tell you something. I had a client that loved the Lord, but this person was so controlling that particularly his son, it was very difficult for this boy, me trying to help this kid see something other than what his father said. His father had an image of what a child should be because of what he grew up in. And because that child didn't look like this father would beat him down emotionally. He would say the most awful things to him and say him in the name of God, and thinking he could justify it because he had to break his spirit. It's like, no, you don't break his spirit. You help him develop. Anyway. Then there's the authoritative. That's the moderate, the parent that sets limits and relies on natural consequences for children to learn from making their own mistakes. Then there's the permissive, or the indulgent parents, who are accepting and warm but exert little control. They do not set limits and allow children to set their own rules and schedules and activities. Then there's the uninvolved parent, who demands little and responds minimally. In extreme cases, this parenting style might entail neglect and rejection. One of the courses that I took was on fathers and daughters. And excuse me. And when a father's relationship with his daughter often determines how early that child will engage in sexual activity. And also whether they will look outside themselves, as the world says, in all the wrong places to find love. And when a parent, even if a father is home in a house, but if a father does not pay attention to that child, it's neglect, believe it or not. He could be sitting right next to her. If he's not engaged in her life, he might as well, for all intents and purposes, not be there. It's actually even more difficult for that child because they can't understand how to get the attention of that parent. Anyway, with this particular study, what they had discovered, they had taken 4.5-year-old kids, and they did a 2-year study. So by the time they got around first grade, they found that, let me give you the statistic, they found that the parent that was the authoritarian, the really hard controlling parent, that child, within 2 years, had gained a substantial amount of weight. 5 times the amount than every other child. When we are overbearing and we are demanding and we are controlling, that child doesn't know what else to do but to try to satisfy themselves. The whole comfort food idea. But these kids, what it says to us is that our relationship with our children definitely affect their development. I mean, I can tell you with this particular person I was talking about, his child is on the heavy side. And I watched this child get heavier and heavier as he grew up because of the way his father treated him. There is something to be said about being like Jesus, loving and kind. You know, we talked about in 1 Corinthians chapter 13 a couple weeks ago, and even though, you know, I'm pulling it out because it really belongs within the context of 12 and 14, those two chapters. But love is patient, it's kind, it's long-suffering. You know, it understands, it doesn't keep a record of wrongs. You know, men, what you guys typically do is you compartmentalize things. So you've got all these little sections in your brain where you store information. We tend to move back and forth all the time, which the disadvantage to that is that everything blends, so we're not able always to differentiate what belongs where. You know, we kind of put them all together. Where a man has to get out of that box, close the door, and walk into the next one. Who was that? Gunger? What was that guy's name? Remember the guy who did the... Yeah, have you guys... I know we've seen it. Have you all seen that series that he did? It is hysterical. He does a series on marriage, and he talks about the way the brain works, and he does a fantastic presentation. It's hilarious. But it's true. It's good information. And he gives some understanding as to why we react the way we do. And, you know, he even gets to the goal. He talks about, you know, how, you know, the man's goal is here and the woman's goal is here, you know, the heart. And, you know, and he talks about how to get there. It's hilarious. It's very good. It's all Christ-centered. And it's something that we need to know. So I think we still have that series, don't we?
We showed it on Wednesday nights.
Maybe we'll do that again. Maybe we'll show it again. So, as I said, so what does that all mean? It all means that the way you interact with your children makes all the difference in the world. And if you have a difficult time interacting with your kids, this is a great opportunity for you, for me, to say to God, okay, I need some healing in my heart so that I can do what's right. And it's not a matter of the doing, it's a matter of having a changed heart. Because if we're always trying to do the right thing, that in itself is frustrating. Because if we fail, we hold ourselves accountable, and there's all this condemnation that we place on ourselves. And that's not what God is doing here. I read another story. This is a story about a father who became disturbed about the length of time his 6-year-old was taking to get home from school. The father decided he would make the trip to discover for himself how long it should take a small boy to cover this distance. The father settled on 20 minutes, but his son was still taking an hour. Finally, the father decided to make the trip with his son. After the trip, the father said, "The 20 minutes I thought reasonable was right, but I failed to consider such important things as a side trip to the track down a trail of ants, or an educational stop to watch a man fix a flat, or a time it took to swing around a half dozen telephone poles, or how much time it took for a boy just to get acquainted with 2 stray dogs and a brown cat. In short," said the father, "I had forgotten what it is really like to be 6 years old." Have you forgotten? I have. And, you know, and when you grow up in an environment where it's very stressful, when you don't have, for people that have never been 6 years old, me, I never had a chance to be 6 years old. So to relate to that was out of my, didn't make sense to me. You know, you get up, you do, and whatever was necessary at that time, that's what you did. So for those of you, and myself, who have not experienced that, we need the supernatural hand of God to come in and give us the ability, or enable us to be able to experience what it's like to be that 6-year-old. One of the greatest things, I think, of having a child is sitting with them and watching them discover. You know, you remember that feeling? You know, you're teaching your child and you're teaching them, and they're like this sponge. And every now and again, they're like dripping all over the place because they have so much stuff that they're learning. Now they fall, they get up, they fall again, they smack their brother. That was Stephen and Keith. Keith had this really cute little sneaker that he used to ride. Remember? And Stephen, oh my gosh. Keith, one day, we actually have it on film. He's sitting, Keith is about a year old, year and a half old, and he's trying to play with this little seat he had. And Stephen is going, he's ramming the shoe into him. And Keith is going, no. And Stephen is gritting his teeth, and he wants to kill him. It was, but that's, that was even part of us discovering what it was like to be a kid. Because these kids just have a natural, like Stephen's the oldest kid. This kid is now, he's infringing on his territory. He did not like it. But that's all part of growing and part of developing. And unfortunately, when you don't know how to do that, if you take the time, you can discover that with your child. I thought that was the best part of being a parent. Didn't you? You loved that too. We just absolutely loved it. We are admonished to be patient with all people, including our children. 1 Thessalonians 5:14 says, "And we urge you, brothers and sisters, warn those who are idle and disruptive. Encourage the disheartened, help the weak, be patient with everybody." We need, as you guys, and it's not just you, it's us too, we need to learn to be patient. We need to learn to humble ourselves and recognize that we don't have all the answers. Even as believers, we are in process. We start here, and we're still on this journey. How does Joyce Meyer say it? She says, "I'm not what I used to be." How does she say?
Where I used to be, but thank God I'm not. Oh, wait a minute. No, I just said it wrong. I'm not where I need to be, but thank God I'm not where I used to be.
I love that, because that tells us that we are in process. And I have things that I thought were absolutely right that really aren't right. And as I'm growing, I'm beginning to discover that. As men, that's part of your journey also. And the position that the Lord has given you guys within the home is so important. As the head goes the body. So if you are not thinking right, if you are not aligned with the Lord somehow, your thinking becomes the direction of your family. And it's something to keep in mind. When it came to making final decisions in our house, and I can't always say I liked it, did I? But, there were some things, I still argue with him over this. If I want to buy a piece of furniture and he doesn't like it, I don't get it. If he likes it, I get it. It's like, I don't like that. But that's the way it was in our home. And it's not like we fought over those things. I don't want to give that impression. But somebody has to be the director of the home. Somebody has to take the position. Although we are partners, when there are decisions, sometimes that need to be made, sometimes we have to step back and let that person make that decision. And it can be very challenging. Paul wanted to take our kids and teach them how to ride a bicycle. I was scared to death that my kids would get hurt. We lived in a town where we had hills all over the place, and there were no sidewalks. So I would pray my fool head off, and he would take them, they put these little helmets on their head, and they'd go, and he taught them how to ride, because I couldn't. I was too afraid of that. But when you're a partner with somebody, you can do that together. One is weak, the other's strong. That's the advantage of having a partner. And for you ladies who have raised your children by yourself, I'll tell you what, I give you a lot of credit, because it's a very difficult challenge. I think it's very difficult. I don't know what I would have done if Paul wasn't with me. So I commend you, because you had to do mom and dad, and you're not a dad. So you have to kind of figure that out. So if I could build a father, I would build a father who is a man of good character, a great example to his children and to his wife, a godly man. One preacher said, as a minister, I conduct many baptismal services. My denomination baptizes in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. One Sunday, my family and I went to a friend's home in the country. Our 4 children went outside to play with the others. After a short while, we heard only silence and wondered what the children were up to. We found them behind a barn, quietly playing church. Our 4-year-old daughter, Susan, was conducting the baptismal service. She held a cat over a barrel of water. Trying to be solemn as her father, she repeated the phrase she had heard many times, "I baptize you in the name of the Father, the Son, and in the hole you go. I love that. And I'm thinking, but you see, her father made an impression, and she was mimicking his behavior. She just didn't hear the whole thing. You know, I know I mentioned my mother-in-law, but when God puts people in your life, especially when you're a dad, I mean, these kids hold you in such high esteem. And they're hoping and praying that they don't know they're doing this unless they're doing without it. But they take for granted that their children, that their dads are going to love them, are going to encourage them, they're going to not harm them. And it's really unfortunate because we don't live in a culture like that. We live in a culture where we read all the time, what is it, 1 in every 4 girls is raped, 1 in every 6 or 7 boys, and most of them happen within families. That's a pretty scary statistic. So guys, you've got a lot of responsibility on your shoulders, and God has equipped you to do that. He's equipped you to guard and to guide and to direct your families, to protect. That is the job that the Lord has given you. That's an awesome responsibility. And you know what? And he knows you can't do it without him, by the way. You know, it's like Gideon, oh, you mighty man of valor. And he's going, really? You got the right guy? He said, go in the strength you have and I'll meet you. That's the same thing with parenting. It's the same thing when God surrounds you with other men or women in your lives, that you have an opportunity to speak into their lives. He knows you cannot do it. He expects you to turn to him, especially those of us who have screwed up, especially those of us who have not learned or have been harmed growing up. It's difficult to give something you don't have. So he knows that. And he still thought that you'd be the best father because those kids belong to you. You have a great privilege to be the parent of that child, to be the friend to the person sitting next to you, to be the grandparent to somebody else. Or maybe you don't have kids, and just be an influence in someone's life. God knew that you could do it because he knew you'd rely on him to do it. Oh, intermission. I gotta do something about this. Well, that's right. I'm going to be cracking gum in between my speaking. Wonder, you think this will be pick? I'm kidding. Hey, if you can come and listen to me, you guys know you can get up and preach, right? Several years ago, there was an interview done by CBS. You remember the program, 48 Hours? Well, they did an investigation into the children of some of the famous people, how they were influenced by what they saw their parents doing while they were growing up. I can't do this. So on this particular program, there was an interview with a man. His name was James Raymond, who was the son of a famous person. You couldn't identify his famous father by his name. However, because he was adopted shortly after birth, he was raised by a California family who kept his adoption record sealed until he was 31 years old. That was when Raymond discovered that his natural father is David Crosby of Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young. It was interesting. I was watching an interview with Crosby, and he was talking about his drug addiction and the alcohol use that he'd done. And he was very foul, and he was challenging the people that were interviewing him at this time, saying, if you haven't done it, then you don't know how good it is, because he related it to his music, because their music is fabulous. I love their music. And he said, every time I did a concert, every time I ever played a song, every time I created something, I was always high. So don't tell me it's not good. I think he's since had a liver transplant, by the way. But anyway, what's really interesting about this particular story is that his son now plays in a band with him. But he didn't have the same morals that his father had, his natural father, because he didn't live in that environment. He lived in an environment with a different type of family. And the people, even though there was a genetic predisposition, for example, he's a naturally inclined, he's a musician. But he didn't have to develop like his dad. He didn't turn out to be like his dad, being the drug addict and being, just a whole different perspective on life. And it had everything to do with the people that influenced his life. You guys are influencers. And you have a choice as to how you influence the people God has surrounded you with. It's something to seriously think about. If you drink or you do drugs or you watch porn, whatever your thing might be that isn't healthy, you've got to think twice about it, because every person is affected. You don't live in a bubble. It affects everybody that's around you. It's something to keep in mind. One of my favorite stories is about Paul. One of my favorite stories is, my kids were little, and I know I've told this story, but it was an awakening for me. We were visiting my parents on Long Island, and the 3 kids had gone to the store. We let them go to the store. I think we were outside, as a matter of fact, waiting for them. And they're in 7-Eleven, and they purchased something, and the guy that was at the register didn't give them the right change. So they came out. Stephen actually came out with the other 2 and showed Paul what he had. And Paul said, no, we're going to go back and get what is yours. And he went back and he took them into the store, and this man gave the kids the appropriate change. The reason it was such an awakening for me is I'd never seen anybody stand on behalf of somebody else. I'd never seen that. For me, at that moment, I was so overwhelmed with it. I kept saying to Paul, do you realize what you've just taught our children? You have taught them that they have value. You have taught them that they don't have to be abused. Just because somebody says something or does something and it's not right, they don't have to stand for it. And he wasn't mean, he wasn't angry, he just went in and let him know clearly that he needed to give his son what was due. That, I think, is one of the greatest lessons that my kids could have learned. And they may not be as aware of it as I was, but I saw the opposite. And so for me growing up, it was more about that I was lacking so much, so I didn't deserve that kind of treatment. Where he automatically didn't even question it. Didn't even question it. Went in and took care of our kids. I mean, that was, I know it might seem insignificant to you, but that was quite monumental to me. A little act like that, what he was doing was that he was building my children. He was teaching them about their value. Step by step. Scripture tells us in Song of Solomon that it's the little foxes that spoil the vine. It's also the little things that build a house. You need a lot of parts, as I read to you in the beginning about building. And that's one of the building blocks. That was really important. The other thing that we did a lot was we prayed with our kids. We read them the Bible. We went to church. Paul taught Sunday school. We were involved in many things. Paul led a home group. I wasn't allowed to, but Paul led the home group. Not just one, he led many. And it was a very interesting thing. There was a time when we were in this church where the pastor of that church was raising Paul up. And I think I just had Rachel. And I dealt with a lot of fear at that time. He had told the pastor that he couldn't be involved in all these things because I needed him. I did need him. So one day, the Lord gave me a word and told me that this pastor was going to tell him that he had to step down, and because of me. And the pastor was going to make him make a choice between the family and the church. And it was very interesting because Paul had come home from a men's breakfast that morning, and the Lord had just told me all this, and I started telling Paul about everything that God had said, and he said, he just did all those things. And it was so interesting because I never said to Paul, you have to choose us. Never. He chose us. He chose us. I mean, to me, that is a mighty man of God. We always came first. We were the most important things in his life. It wasn't about having to come up with something to do. It was natural for Paul. And I think that when I asked the Lord many years ago, after I got saved, and I met Paul actually 6 months later, and I said, God, I need a man. When it's time to get married, this man has to love you more than he loves me. He has to be willing to look at the mistakes and the fact that he's not perfect. If we're ever going to grow, if we can ever change, because you can't, if the minute you think you've arrived, you stop growing, guys. I said to the Lord, I need a man that is going to love me, because I don't know what love is. And I need a man that I can love and feel safe. And I've shared this with you, and the Lord told me to move back to New York because there was a Jewish man that I was going to marry. Somebody went to school with him, would happen fast. I mean, I was his mail order bride that he didn't know he ordered. I ordered a husband. But anyway, I mean, that's what I got. And I'm so grateful, because I would not be who I am if I did not have him. So what we are to each other is profound. It is so important. It's not about, my relationship with my husband's relationship with my children, our children. It's not about you guys. It's about us standing together as one. That's what the home is supposed to be like. You stand together with your partner, and you do what is right. You search, you have a relationship with the Lord, and when you have that relationship with the Lord, it just naturally goes down, it just seeps into your children, into your family. Now, it does not mean that we did everything right, because we did not. We did not. But we serve a God that's greater than our mistakes. And that God can take all of those things and does something fabulous with them. He's not a respecter of persons, so he's not going to do for us that he won't do for you. We all have an idea of what we think somebody's supposed to look like, how they're supposed to behave. But the Lord has a plan. It's like, more than anything, I don't want them to move, but if that's God's plan, that's God's plan. And who are we to stand in the way of what God is? 1 Corinthians 11:1 says, "For my example, follow my example as I followed the example of Christ." You guys are an example of Christ to us. You're an example of Christ to your kids, your grandchildren. Take it seriously. And know that you cannot do it without the Lord helping you to do it. So if I could, I would build a loving father. 1 Corinthians 1:8 says, "We know that we possess all knowledge. Knowledge puffs up, but love builds up." There's a Spanish story of a father and a son who had become estranged. The son ran away, and the father set off to find him. He searched for months to no avail. Finally, in the last desperate effort to find him, the father put an ad in the Madrid newspaper. The ad read, "Dear Paco, meet me in front of this newspaper office at noon on Saturday. All is forgiven. I love you. Your father." On Saturday, 800 Pacos showed up looking for forgiveness and love from their fathers. Interesting, huh? Dr. Dobson says, "Love isn't something you buy. Your kids spell it T-I-M-E. It costs more than M-O-N-E-Y. With a timid voice and idolizing eyes, this little boy greeted his father as he returned from work. "Daddy, how much do you make an hour?" Greatly surprised, but giving his boy a glaring look, the father said, "Look, son, not even your mother knows that. Don't bother me now, I'm tired." "But Daddy, just tell me, please, how much do you make an hour?" the boy insisted. The father, finally giving up, replied, $20 per hour. "Okay, Daddy, could you loan me $10, the boy asked. Showing restlessness and positively disturbed, the father yelled, "So that was the reason you asked me how much I earned, right? Go to sleep and don't bother me anymore." It was already dark, and the father was meditating on what he had said and was feeling guilty. Maybe he thought, His son wanted to buy something. Finally, trying to ease his mind, the father went to his son's room. "Are you asleep, son?" asked the father. "No, Daddy, why?" replied the boy, partially asleep. "Here's the money you asked for earlier," the father said. "Oh, thanks, Daddy," rejoiced the boy, while putting his hand under his pillow and removing some money. "Now I have enough. Now I have $20, the boy said to his father, who was gazing at his son, confused at what his son had just said. "Daddy, could you sell me 1 hour of your time?" That's touching. Makes me want to cry. Something to think about. You know I told you I was going to keep referring to Paul because he's the man of my life. I don't really have to give you stories, other people's stories, because we have our own. And last year, I think it was last year, Keith, that you put together that, you and Megan and the other kids had put together that video, remember, honoring Dad. Every kid desperately wants their fathers to love them. They want their mothers too, don't misunderstand. Every child on planet Earth is looking for somebody to come alongside of him or her and say, "I'll help you, I'll walk with you, I'll teach you what I know." We are so busy. We're so busy. One of the things that I love about what Paul did, Paul's job afforded him the opportunity to go and spend time with our kids at their games. And if I was working, I couldn't. But he would schedule his time around the kids' games. He coached, I coached. We did all these things with our children. And for me, and I think for you, because we've actually talked about this recently, his antitype was his dad. My antitype was my mother. They became our barometer, and what they were, we're not. So what that meant was that we were going to pour into our children. We were going to give them what we could. We were going to be a unit. And I'm grateful that we had that opportunity. But if you haven't had that opportunity yet, it doesn't mean it still can't happen. Kids might be older. It's okay. They still want to be loved. Who in here doesn't want to be loved? I want to be loved, don't you? Don't you want people to come alongside you and say, "Hey, good job, you're fabulous. Come here, come along, let me come alongside you, let me talk to you, let me love you, let me encourage you, let me help you find your way." Who doesn't want that? I'm 57 years old, I still want it. I want to be affirmed. Don't you want to be affirmed? Of course we do. Ideally, we should get all of our affirmation from God, but let's face it. Have you arrived? Well, I haven't. Maybe you have. I haven't. There's another story I want to tell you, and then I'll finish. It's a very powerful story. It's a story from the Bible. It's a story about a father and a son, King David and his son Absalom. Through a series of circumstances, Absalom began to despise his father, King David, and made plans to become king in place of his father. In the beginning, he did things that didn't seem to be a danger, but he was winning the hearts of the people of Israel. The day came when he saw an opportunity and openly led a rebellion against his father and attempt to take over his kingdom. David's greatest fear was that Absalom would be destroyed in the battle, which is exactly what happened. When word came that Absalom had been killed, far from being happy about it, the Bible says the king was shaken. He went up to the room over the gateway and wept. And he said, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died instead of you, oh Absalom, my son." This is 2 Samuel 18:33. David's heart was not to be destroyed. David's heart was not to destroy his son, but to save his son, even if it meant dying in his place. Now that's a good example. It's a type of Jesus, but that's the heart of a father. In spite of what Absalom thought, Absalom wanted to be king, and the ironic thing is that David may have eventually given him that position because he was the firstborn. David was not his enemy. He was his father. He loved him in spite of his rebellion. Can you look at your kids and in rebellion love them anyway? Yeah, that's the heart of a father. The father that I've been building is the father that we know as God. And I don't want you leaving here feeling bad. I want you to know that God knows that we can't do it. He knows when we've made mistakes. And I believe what the Lord is saying today, and I know that because the Lord gave me the word restoration for this year, that He wants to restore. He wants to teach us how to do the things we do not know how to do. I think He wants to impart to us, impute. He wants to literally put something inside of us that we don't have right now to give because we don't have any resources in us to draw from. But you see, God is greater than those things. And He wants to literally drop into your spirit what you need. I believe that. I believe that with all my heart. I believe, as it says in Isaiah, when He takes down the mountain and brings up the valley, and He clears off the rough space, and you've got this beautiful plain sitting in front of you. I believe that's what God has for each one of us. But it requires us allowing God to do the work in our hearts. And you don't have to arrive to moving in the fullness of God. You do not have to arrive because God works supernaturally. That's why we have the Spirit. Remember, we're led by the Spirit. The Spirit of God. We are a spirit being that's housed in a physical body with emotions. This is a great opportunity. It says so in 1 Corinthians 3:7, so neither he who plants nor he who waters is anything, but only God who makes things grow. God takes the little that we have and He does fabulous things with it. Fathers, men, I'm grateful for you guys. I am really grateful for you. I love being a woman, and I love the fact that there are men. And I love that we don't have to be the same. And I like that we can have relationships with each other. We can have a marriage relationship. We can have friendship relationships. And they can be appropriate. They can all be okay. We keep God in the center of all the things that we need to do. Allow God to do the work in your heart. Let Him draw you into His presence. And when He draws you into His presence, things in you change. You have a fabulous future. You have a future with the God that says, you know what, Bill, I love your kids. And I know you're the best daddy for them. And because you're the best daddy, I'm going to show you how to daddy them. Daddy them? Father them. Rich, your boys, the 4 boys, even the 2 that weren't yours that God brought into your family, He knew exactly who you were. He knew exactly what you'd be able to give them and not give them. He's still God. I love that. He loves those boys. That's all of us. And the mothers who are parented without fathers, God knew that too. And God said, okay, I'm going to step in and be daddy to these boys and to these girls. Even if we've screwed up. And I've screwed up a lot. Keith will tell you, I'm sure. I'm a good mom. Okay. But my point is this, is that none of us have arrived. But today is a day to honor you guys for doing the best you could. And I'm so grateful that we have you. And I'm grateful that God is not done with you. And I'm grateful that we get to align ourselves with you and allow you to build into our lives, into the lives that people have surrounded you with, including our children. It's really a privilege. So happy Father's Day. Amen.